Well, good morning.
So this morning's reading is taken from Daniel chapter 6, and it can be found on page 809, I think? 891, sorry. I'm using the large print, so it's a different page. Daniel in the den of lions. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 chief ministers over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself amongst the chief ministers and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the chief ministers and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So these chief ministers and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal ministers, prefects, satraps, advisors and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sunset to save him.
Then these men came as a throng into the king and said to the king, "Remember, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or edict which the king issues may be altered." So the king gave the order, and Daniel was brought and thrown into the lion's den. Now the king spoke to Daniel, saying, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." A stone was brought to block the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet of the nobles, so that nothing could be changed regarding Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. No entertainment was brought before him. He was unable to sleep. At dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. As he reached the den, he cried out to Daniel with a voice of anguish. The king spoke out to Daniel, saying, "Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, whom you serve continually, able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel spoke to the king, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths, so that they haven't harmed me because I was found innocent before him. Nor have I committed any crime against you, O king." Then the king was overjoyed and ordered Daniel taken up out of the den. So Daniel was lifted out of the pit. No injury of any kind was found on him because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den. They, their children and their wives. They had not even reached the bottom of the pit before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations and languages dwelling in all the earth, "May your peace be abundant. I issue a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, people are to tremble with fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He delivers and rescues. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and the earth. He has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian.
This is the word of the Lord.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be with you today. There's a few familiar faces for me here because for those of you who don't know me, my name's Claire, and a very long time ago, my family and I were here worshipping at St James's where we had our children. We were here for 15 years, and then we switched the countryside for the seaside, and via Lancaster we now live over in Morecambe. But it's a joy to be invited to come back while you're in this time of interregnum, as Mark has taken his retirement, and in this in-between period while you're waiting to see who the Lord's going to bring next to lead this church, then it's an absolute joy to be here and to open the scriptures together and to break bread together. Can I pray before we begin? Lord Jesus, as we've heard from the scriptures this morning, Holy Spirit, would you come and be our teacher today? Would you bring them to life in our hearing and in our living out of our obedience to you? So come, Holy Spirit, be our teacher, be our leader this morning. Bring things to life in us in a new way today. Amen. I just need some help from somebody. Does anybody know how to do a Rubik's Cube? This is one of those things I reckon you either know how to do and you can do it like in 2 minutes flat, or like me, you look at it and think, I have no idea how to bring order out of this chaos of what is this current cube. Anybody here know how to do a Rubik's Cube? Anybody want to give it a go? Clearly not. Oh, we've got a volunteer. Oh, I'm chucking it everywhere. In my excitement. You think you can do it? And is he here? Well, in that, all that enthusiasm, that totally, well, I feel doubly disappointed now. Yeah. Right. So the most amazing thing about Ryan, despite all of his other accolades, he can do a Rubik's Cube really quick. It is a thing, isn't it? It's like, so Janet's going to have a go at it. Thank you, Janet. Janet, do you know how to do them? Yeah, see, this is the thing. I reckon when we were kids, we either spent our years figuring out Rubik's Cube or trying to rescue the princess from Bowser on Mario. I was that kid on the Nintendo. Janet clearly, looking at the Rubik's Cube and working out the puzzles. But it's a long time, so you've got to dredge that knowledge up, Janet. What I do know about Rubik's Cubes is that there's a pattern and a routine, and if you get it right and you take every step in the right thing, then it should by the end, look like all the colours in the right order. So that's your goal, Janet, okay? And we're going to have a race, and I'm going to pick up the pace because in the first service, I took way too long doing this bit. So Janet and I are going to have a race. I noticed that Janet's already started, so that makes her a big cheat. But I will let her off. So, right, you ready, Janet? We're going to have a race. I've been asked to talk about the whole of Daniel. So, challenge accepted, and let's see if I can do it and not talk for too long. Got to beat my own goal there. So, what I'm going to do is Janet and I are going to have a race. I'm going to give us an overview of the story so far of Daniel and to take us up to the chapter that we got to just now where Daniel gets thrown into the lion's den, which is the one we all kind of know, isn't it, if we've been in Sunday school or school assemblies. Right, Janet, are you ready? On your marks, get set, go, even though you've already been going for 2 minutes. Okay, so here's what's happening. Daniel is around in the exile, okay? So basically the exile is the times between the really good times when they had loads of kings and it was the Israelites had their own place in Jerusalem. And then the exile is the kind of definitely not the good old days. So when God chose the Israelites to be his people, and for them to be his people and him to be their God, his promise was that he would bless them for the purpose of them being a blessing to the world around them. They then had a series of kings. Some of them were really good, and you knew that they were good because they were obedient to God. Others were bad, and you knew that they were bad because they were disobedient to God, and they went off and they worshipped other gods. That's how you know. There was a series of battles. They won some, they lost some, and eventually the temple in Jerusalem is totally destroyed, and the Israelites have no place that they call their own and no obvious place to worship, and they live in other people's land, under other people's rule, and they are in exile and living in oppression. Okay, so that is the context that we meet Daniel. So we've got Daniel and his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who become Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Do you remember that story with the fiery furnace? That's coming up. And they get chosen and then trained to be the king's wise counsel. And God equips them for this task. How are we getting on with the Rubik's Cube, Janet? She's got one side, I need to pick up the pace. Okay, so Daniel and his friends serve the king, and that means that they get to eat from the king's table, all the finest. This is like, all the best bits from booths would be on the king's table. All the fine wines, choice meats, and Daniel and his friends remember that God has said to the Israelites, one of the ways that the world will know that you are my people and I am your God is because there are certain things I'm going to ask you not to eat. And those things were the things on the king's table. So they have this, they sort of politely decline all the booths best, and they say, please can we just have vegetables and water? And long story short, God basically makes them strong on this kind of very meager diet. So that's going on. So there's obedience there. King Nebuchadnezzar, who's the king of Babylon, where they live, has this really weird dream. And he goes to his advisors and says, can you tell me what this means? And God gives Daniel the gift of wisdom that he can tell the king what his dream was and then tell him what it means. And there's this gift of God that Daniel has. And Nebuchadnezzar is so impressed that he promotes Daniel and his friends to kind of the next level in the royal household. How are we doing, Janet? She's messing it up again, okay. That's probably means you're maybe a step closer, right? Maybe, we'll see. So we get the moment with the golden statue that the king builds and says, everybody's got to worship this. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, we actually only worship the Lord. And what happens to them is they get thrown into the fiery furnace. And in the fiery furnace, there are not 3 men, but 4 men walking around. and it's the angel of the Lord comes and rescues them and takes them out of the fire. Okay, King Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. This one's a bad one, and Daniel once again listens to the Lord, bravely delivers the message to the king, and says, you need to just repent and turn around, otherwise you're going to lose everything. And of course, the king doesn't. He carries on as he is. He loses everything. And in that losing everything, he realizes at that rock bottom moment that he needs to submit himself to the Lord, that this power and authority that he thought he had as king was nothing compared to the power and authority of the God who has chosen Daniel and his friends, rescued them from fire, and will go on to do amazing things. And so Nebuchadnezzar writes this, I raised my eyes towards heaven and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. So we start to see this glimpse of God blessing Daniel and his friends in this chaotic way that they've found themselves in exile. And he starts to bring things into order. And he not only is going to bless them, but he's starting to bless Nebuchadnezzar, not with new stuff, but with that presence of God. That is the source of the blessing. Okay, and that pretty much brings us up to date. Janet, how are we doing? She's got brain freeze. Where are we up to? Come and show us. I guarantee it'll be better than what I can possibly do. This is pretty good. So we've got one clear side, and then a few greens, few blues. That's well on the way. Yellow. Can we give her a round of applause? Thank you, Janet. I need a little shelf here, but that feels a bit precarious, so I'll sit it there. We need to ring Ryan. How quick can he get here? We all need Ryan to come and help us. So Rubik's Cube, the way that it works is to get that colours in order from the chaos of the rest. There's like step-by-step instructions, aren't there? If we had Ryan here, your mate, he'd probably be able to say, all you need to do is if you twist it like this, and then like that, and then you do this other thing, then you'll find you've got one matched thing. And then what you do, and he'll tell us the next steps, wouldn't he? I'll let you into a secret. This, if you know my husband, Jim, you will know he can't just buy a thing without it being a gadget. And this is a gadget. And if you plug it in, it connects to an app, which I think is bonkers. And if you, once it's connected to the app on your phone or your device, it then shows you the step-by-step instructions of what to do. The problem is it always disconnects because it's a bit of a rubbish connection. And so I lose patience and give up on it. But you can follow the step-by-step and get that instant feedback. Oh, no, you've gone too far, go back one, or whatever. And you follow those, taking the steps at a time. I'm going to mess this up again. No, Janet, I'll put it back together, I promise. Then we find order starts to come from the chaos. So back to our reading. Here we are with Daniel. And his colleagues, the other people who've got power and authority in the kingdom of Darius now. So we've moved on from Nebuchadnezzar, and now King Darius is the king. And they get jealous of the relationship that Daniel had with the king, because the king grows in his trust in Daniel as Daniel maintains his obedience to the Lord. And so they want to catch him out, and they know that if they have to go for his relationship with God, because every other part of his life is full of integrity. They write, it says, they could find no corruption in Daniel because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. And finally these men said, we'll never find a charge against him unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Daniel's life is so ordered around his prayer and his relationship with God that it spills out into every part of his life. And so what do? They go to the king, to Darius, and they appeal to Darius's pride and say, you know, you're the king and everybody should just be worshipping you. So why don't we have a little celebration, and for 30 days we'll make it law that nobody can pray to any other person or God apart from you. 30 days, it'll be like a great celebration. And so Darius signs this agreement. And I wonder what you would do in this situation. I'll be honest, I would be tempted to think, it's only 30 days. I don't really want to get thrown into a pit of lions. Because these lions aren't like the lions that we see in the children's Bibles, where they're kind of giant kittens, all cuddled up with Daniel in the corner in the sun. These lions had teeth, and they knew how to use them. We've heard that, didn't we, in the end of the chapter? These are ferocious lions, and they're hungry. And I'd be thinking, that's not really in my plan to, go to hang out with the lions. So it's only 30 days. Maybe I can just not pray for 30 days. Or maybe at least I can pray quietly or silently and just kind of hide away. And nobody has to know if I just, utter a little prayer to God. I would be really tempted because fear would probably grip my heart. And that would be the temptation. There you go. There is my confession. But Daniel doesn't do that. Listen to this in verse 9. So Daniel doesn't do this. I hate it when two names are very similar. I'll get it wrong all the time. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel learnt the decree had been published, first thing he does, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem, where the temple had been and the symbol of the presence of God with the Israelites. And 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he had before. And then these men went as a group, found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So he mustn't have been praying quietly. He's got the windows open and he's praying. And they hear him, and they come and they take him and they throw him in the lion's den. And the king, Darius, couldn't override his own law. He didn't have power to do that. He tries, but he doesn't have power to overthrow his own law that he has signed and set. Instead, what we see is the presence of God once again in the lion's den with Daniel, and God rescues Daniel from the lion's den. And we get this image again where there's the human power and then there's God's power. And they are not the same thing. And I think that Daniel must have known this. I wonder if we had Daniel over for dinner, and did a lovely vegetarian stir fry with, very fine bottle of water. I wonder what stories he would tell, because I would be really tempted to tell the impressive stories. Let me tell you about the time when the king asked me to, interpret his dreams, and this is what I said, and it was right. I'd be really tempted to tell those stories where I'd look really good. I wonder, though, if Daniel, rather than telling his story through that lens of, don't you know how I'm a hero of the faith, although he is, I wonder if he would tell that overarching story. Do you know who God is? And let me tell you about the power of God and the authority of God. Because, as he is in his prayer life, I think one of the things that we see is that Daniel, he doesn't just pray and live in obedience to God in those big moments. Do you notice that when he goes up to his room, it says he prayed he got on his knees and he prayed 3 times a day, giving thanks to God, just as he had before. There's a rhythm and a pattern to Daniel's prayer life that is coming into the presence of God and listening to God in the way of saying, Lord, what do you want me to do today? It's like in this chaotic place. And he says, God, what do you want me to do today? And God says, do this. And he does it. And then God says, great, now do this. And Daniel does it. And he's obedient in those small, everyday steps, those things that God says, just don't eat that food, eat this food. And Daniel goes, okay, and does it. And that's the pattern of Daniel's prayer life. And as he does that step by step, following God every day, listening, praying, not, God, I'm going to do this, will you bless it? But rather, what should I do today, Lord? And then being obedient to that, he starts to find order coming into not only the chaos of his life, but in the world around him as well. It's like Daniel knew and lived. There was a beautiful line if you listen to the Lectio 365 Sabbath day prayer, there's a really beautiful line in there that says that may we know our finite smallness in the arms of God's infinite greatness. And I think Daniel knew that. When he prayed, he knew that he was coming into the presence of the God whose greatness is infinite. And therefore, any situation he found himself in, there was a finite situation. And so when we're given the choice of obedience to the God who has infinite greatness and power and dominion over all things, even over shutting the mouths of lions and rescuing people from the flames of the furnace, then in comparison, when an earthly king, just an earthly king who is your oppressor, says, you should do this, you should stop praying, of course the answer is, no, I'm going to be obedient to God who has all power and dominion. There's a consistency to his prayer life. Daily, 3 times a day, listening to God. Obedience over a long period of time. Obedience in the small things that prepares him to be obedient in the big things. And if I'm honest with you, sometimes my prayer pattern is a bit like when this connects to the app. It drops out, disconnects a little bit, I get a bit frustrated, and you've got to reconnect and rejoin in again to tune back into the voice of God. And what I've learned over the years is that God never ever gets frustrated with us and gives up like I might with the app. God always says, just come on, let's go again. And his grace welcomes us back into his presence. And he says, great, you're here now, let's talk. And we listen and we respond in obedience again. So I wonder what God is asking each of us to do next. And how do you know? How do you know what God is asking you to do? Well, we can read the Bible. That's a really good place to start because that's full of God's voice and ways in which he teaches us what it's like and what's required of us to live in obedience to him. We can find other people, our friends, other Christians around us that help us, that give us courage to keep going and that challenge us when we're maybe taking our foot off the gas a little bit. And we may have different ways to pray along the way as well. But the main thing is that we do come to God in prayer, that we do listen. We keep listening regularly in the small things so that we can be obedient to in the big things. And we're going to come to the communion table in a few moments. And at this table, what that reminds us is that, do you know, Daniel's story is also one part of God's story, which is almost like on a cosmic level. And all things really point beyond themselves back to Jesus. As we read Daniel's story, we hear kind of echoes of Jesus, of that salvation, of Jesus rescuing us from death, of God meeting us in the chaos and bringing order to our lives. It's a gift from God. And my prayer for this community, you're not quite in exile, but there is this point, isn't there, where Mark's gone and Ella have left. And there's this time of in between where we don't quite know yet who the new vicar will be. But my prayer for you as a church family is that in this in-between time, that you find and keep a rhythm of prayer that enables you to listen closely to the voice of God, both in the small things and the big things. And that in that you'll deepen your sense of trust in God. Because, there will be a new vicar that comes here, but they aren't going to be the hope for Clitheroe or for this church. That's Jesus. Jesus is the hope, isn't he? Jesus is the one who leads us as his body. Yes, we have different people in different roles, and that's really important. But it's Jesus, it's being with him that sustains us and leads us. So as we come to his table in a few minutes, we do this regularly, partly out of obedience, because Jesus says, whenever you break bread and share wine in this way, remember me. And so we're doing this to remember Jesus because he told us to do it. So that's part of our obedience. We do this in the season of Lent as we look forward to the cross. But as always, when we find that when we're faithful and obedient to Jesus, whatever we think that we're giving up to do that, what we discover is that we're actually blessed. We're blessed because he meets us at his table. And whatever we lose for the gospel, whatever we give up to follow Jesus, it is always worth it because we discover him and he gives his full self to us. I'm going to pause there. Thank you, Naomi.